It seems like everywhere I look these days, all over social media, everybody is talking about attachment theory, and specifically attachment theory when it relates to dating. I often hear people describe themselves as an anxious attachment style, or how they always seem to attract avoidance. I hear people talk about how men are naturally avoidant and women have a tendency towards anxious attachment. And I feel like people are adopting these sort of attachment styles almost like another personality trait, or a label like their star sign. But here's the truth. If you even really need to be working on your attachment style with your partner, then it is a high likelihood that this relationship is probably just not the right relationship for you. So today I want to unpack a little bit more about what attachment styles are, why we talk about them in relation to dating, and why I think people are taking them in a direction that they were never really intended to go. But first, if you're new here, my name is Tanya and I'm a family lawyer and mediator. And on this channel, I like to discuss all things related to relationships, from dating to divorce. If that sounds like something you're interested in, please make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell, do all that good stuff. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want to work with me, my professional details will be linked below. Now, with all that out of the way, let's dive into what attachment styles really are all about. Now, all of this stems from something we call attachment theory. And while I'm not a psychologist, I have studied attachment theory in relation to children who are going through divorce, because obviously, as a family lawyer and mediator, this is something that I need to understand. In fact, you will find that most lawyers who work in this space will at some point have been trained or studied attachment theory. Now, the theory originally came from people called Bowlby and Ainsworth, and it really focused on the child and caregiver relationship and the way that that can impact people into the future and into adulthood. And so, of course, it's highly relevant in situations where parents are getting separated, because we need to look at how to minimize the trauma to the children from being separated from their parents, because inevitably, when they're with one parent, they're without the other parent. It's also why there are recommendations around different contact arrangements being appropriate for different age groups and different stages of life. For example, it's why we often don't recommend that infants under the age of 1 are separated from their primary caregiver and their primary attachment figure, and why you don't very often see 50-50 arrangements for very young babies. Now, the different attachment styles range from anxious to avoidant, but there are a few in between. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about all the different styles and nuances, but I just want you to understand that it's a bit of a spectrum. Some people put it like a bit of a pie chart or a square chart, but either way, however you want to visualize it, understand that at one end you have the anxious attachment style, at the other end you have the avoidant attachment style, and then you have a few variations in between. Now, the anxious attachment style tends to be the person who has abandonment issues, essentially, and the way that they cope with that is that they feel very insecure about their attachments to people, to caregivers, and the way that this manifests is that they tend to be clingy. So when you see children being very clingy with their parent, you know, when they're, let's say, being dropped off at school, dropped off with the other parent, dropped off with somebody else, this is a sign that that child is developing an anxious attachment style. Later on, this can manifest as people who fear abandonment and who can never really feel secure that the person that they are with actually loves them, despite being told this and shown this in multiple different ways. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have what we refer to as the avoidant attachment style. And this is usually a child who has learned to cope with separation from a caregiver by emotionally shutting down. These are the children who actually tend to fly under the radar more often in separations, because they're the ones who seem okay going from parent to parent. They're not super clingy the way that the anxious attachment child will be, but they are actually becoming emotionally detached. They've learned that that is a good coping strategy. And so having no reaction, this differs from a child with a secure attachment, because while they're not negatively reacting the way you might have an anxious child reacting, they're also not necessarily bouncing off and super confident and happy, because they are emotionally detaching, and that is their coping mechanism. And so they tend to be a little bit more subdued and very kind of blank. And that usually is why it doesn't get picked up as much as the anxious child. Now, later in life, this can manifest in kind of the opposite end of the coin to the anxious, because while they also will feel insecure in their relationships and not feel like they can trust the bond and trust their partner, the way that they will cope with it is that they will withdraw emotionally, or they simply won't connect emotionally. They will be emotionally distant, a little bit cold, and it's because they can't trust, like letting someone in, because they fear being hurt. So that was a very brief rundown. And like I said, there are other sort of styles in between. I'm not really going to get into that. I'm not here to talk in detail about attachment styles. I'm sure there are other videos that go into much better detail than I ever could. What I want to talk about is how we've taken these attachment styles and seemingly pathologized them, adopted them as personality traits, and then we use them to excuse all kinds of problems in dating and in relationships. And this is where I feel like we've gone off the rails when it comes to attachment. And I do feel like this is also a little bit of a gendered issue, not a criticism, but I think women are more likely to want to deal with their problems and to go to therapy, which I think is great. But I think the flip side of that is that they can over-therapize every single situation to the point where they are analyzing, their friends and their partners and the guy that they're dating or whoever, and coming up with all the reasons why they're doing these things because of fill in blank with whatever therapy speak you want, but that isn't really helping them in terms of their interpersonal relationships. Or alternatively, it's used as a way of excusing bad behavior because, he just had childhood trauma, her mother abandoned her, or whatever the case may be. But in reality, the truth is that other people's problems are not your problems. So while I think it's great that people have recognized that certain things that may have happened in their childhood could potentially impact the way that they look at, enter into relationships, and the way that that sort of manifests. And I think it's great that people can heal that within themselves. The problem that I have is when it kind of flips into therapizing other people and then putting up with bad behavior because you think that there's a reason for it, and if you can just work on this together, then you can improve the situation. The way that I deal with these men so that I'm not triggering their avoidant tendencies. And that's where I have a problem, because it's not your job to avoid triggering someone else's trauma or someone else's issues in order for you to be able to be treated well. So even if you're dating and you meet somebody who is showing signs that they have an avoidant attachment style, the appropriate response is not to modify your behavior to try to get them to come to you and not withdraw. The appropriate response is to leave them alone, okay? Because the truth is you will never have a secure attachment with somebody who has an insecure attachment style. And both anxious and avoidant are insecure attachment styles. So your task, if you feel like you have one of these insecure attachment styles, is to heal your own problems and to come to a place where you feel safe and secure within yourself to have a relationship with someone else. But the second part of the equation is finding somebody who is also on that same wavelength, that you can have a secure attachment with them. Because no matter what you do, if the other person has an insecure attachment style, They will always be triggered and they will always be triggering you. So this idea of, for example, explaining away bad behavior, like, oh, he's just an avoidant, give him space and he'll come to you. No, because the truth is that's just rude, okay? And very often what I see people explain as their quote unquote anxious attachment style is often just normal human reactions to being treated badly. I think it is perfectly normal if you are dating somebody that you like to feel bad about yourself, to feel anxious, to feel confused if 1 minute they're all over you and then the next minute you don't hear from them for a week. That is normal reaction, okay? That is not because you have an anxious attachment style. That is because you're human. And so rather than seeing that as a sign that you need to fix yourself and then modify your behavior to try to make this work, I want people to see this as a sign that this relationship is not for you. This is not your person. The two of you clearly are not clicking, and you do not need to be with somebody who is going to make you feel bad about yourself, give you anxiety, leave you feeling confused, leave you feeling anxious. Those are not positive things. And the other issue that I have that I've noticed is that very often, and again, this is a gendered thing that I've noticed, women in particular expressing normal needs or expressing that their needs are not being met in a relationship, again, is not anxious attachment style. And I think sometimes, not always, okay, but sometimes that line is being blurred because truly when you're having this anxious attachment style that is disruptive to your relationship, it is objectively in a situation where the person is treating you very well, they're very consistent, they're very reassuring, but you still feel anxious about it. But being in a relationship where your needs are objectively not being met, of course, is going to leave anybody anxious, anybody insecure, and expressing that you have certain needs and that emotionally you need to feel supported and seen and respected and loved and cared for, that is not asking too much. And I do think that sometimes I see women internalizing this idea that their very normal needs in a relationship are too much and that they should suppress those because they have an anxious attachment style and they're just being unreasonable. They need to heal that so that they don't feel like they need anything from their partner, and that's not a healthy dynamic either. I promise you that when you have a healthy relationship with two people who can form secure attachment, and by the way, I believe that everybody is capable of forming secure attachments with the right person in the right circumstances. Yes, you might need to do a bit of healing work. Yes, you need to recognize your own problems and deal with them. But nobody is really incapable, or very few people. I mean, outside of the fringes of like personality disorder sort of area. Outside of that, most sort of mentally sane, let's say, people are capable of forming secure attachments. And when you find somebody and you have a healthy relationship with secure attachment, it shouldn't feel like work. It shouldn't feel like your needs are not being met or your needs are too much for the other person, or it's too triggering to message them, like that will trigger them, or that you have to tiptoe around their feelings. None of those things will happen in a healthy relationship. So as soon as you are feeling that way, as soon as you are feeling off balance, confused, like you need to change your behavior to kind of make them also alter their behavior, as soon as any of that is happening, I want you to take that as a warning sign that this is not the relationship for you and that it isn't always your fault. It's not because of your attachment style or your childhood trauma. It could just be that that person is an a-hole and that they are treating you poorly and that it is normal to feel bad about that. And honestly, one final observation. The people that I know who end up in those sort of healthy, stable, secure relationships, they're the ones who don't overthink this type of stuff. They're not always trying to label every feeling that they have or everything that somebody else does as some type of therapeutic speak. They are literally operating on the basis that the relationship is either good for them or it's not good for them. And if it's not good for them, they will simply exit, stage left, remove that person from their life and not overthink it. In this way, they avoid ending up in this trap of trying to heal someone else's trauma. You are not a rehab center for broken people. It is not your job to figure out someone else's problems or help them through it. Your job is to deal with your own problems, and once you've done that, only be in relationships with others who are also aware of and have healed their own issues. If they're going to bring their baggage and their trauma into the relationship, then that is not a good situation for you and you need to move on. So that's my personal take on attachment styles and how I observe them manifesting in romantic relationships. Now I'd love to hear from you. You let me know what you think in the comments below because I always love to hear your opinion. If you enjoyed this video, consider checking out one of these and hopefully I will see you there. Bye for now.